What is purpose-led advertising, and what does this mean for where you position your marketing pounds? I could subtitle this, Are You Advertising Enough with Campaign? But I'm not going to do that because we've got lots of quality media out there. So we'll start with Claire Blunt, who's Chief Advertising Officer and CEO International of The Guardian. So welcome, Claire. Stephen Woodford, who's the CEO of the Advertising Association, and Marsha Jackson, who's Project Director of the Conscious Advertising Network. So we've heard from some great brands during the course of the day, and there's been lots of discussion about purpose-led advertising. I'm going to ask Stephen to go first. As someone who cares deeply about advertising, is there such a thing as purpose-led advertising?
Well, there absolutely is, and I think one of the things that we've got to be conscious of, I think, is looking at this through the lens of the consumer. And I should think I'm probably not on either. Okay, shall I go to the lectern actually, because I'm going to present some charts, because I think is the lectern mic working? Can you all hear me? That's good. Okay. So what I want to do is show some research around what drives trust and favourability in advertising. And I think the important thing is to look at what the public think about this.
Fine. Sorry, Stephen, because I wasn't expecting that to start with. So I'm going to ask you to sit back down just for 1 minute, okay? Only because once the slides happen, that'll be really good. So I probably should have primed you on that point. So if I frame the question slightly more, you come to the slides in a few minutes, but just in the point of the role of purpose, I mean, we've heard a lot about it. I guess my kind of question is purpose always central to great advertising?
No, it's absolutely not central to great advertising. I think one of the really interesting phenomenon in the last probably decade, but probably accelerated in the last 2 years, how company purpose is becoming more and more to the fore. And I think I've been in business a long, long time, and I think my theory for why that is that as products and services have become, in effect, uniformly excellent, you can't buy a bad car nowadays, as an example. Whereas when I was young, you could buy some terrible cars and some good cars. As products and services through competition become better and better, then actually people are looking for other reasons for choice. And increasingly they're looking at the company behind the brand and the products and the service that they're choosing. I think very interesting hearing Pete Jevons and BT. 10 years ago, BT wouldn't have talked about purpose. Now he's talking about it as the sort of articulating mission for the company. So, they're not just providing telecoms and all the things that they do. They're actually thinking through what's the ultimate societal and customer benefit and benefit to the economy of what we do. And if we can articulate that, particularly as a brand leader, we can own the category high ground. I think more and more you see brands and companies wanting to own that sort of high ground of really what's the fundamental. Why do I buy or why do I use this thing? I don't use it because I want internet. I use it because I want to be connected to the world. And so if you can associate your brand with the key drivers from a consumer point of view, that thing we all learned at university or school about psychology, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you can get further up that pyramid in terms of ultimately self-actualization at the top of the pyramid, then you are going to be in a more resilient and more robust place and potentially a more premium place for your brand.
There's going to be a lot of swapping of this. I've tested negative, so I'm fine. I've also had my third jab, so that's good. Now, listening to Stephen, and I know I slightly sprung the question on you like that, but when I think of, I've made a slight joke about campaign at the start, but when I think of news and magazine brands, and we've got The Guardian here, I think Claire would say purpose has been at the heart of The Guardian probably from the start. So, Claire, I want to get on to the second half of the question in a minute about, how should this affect our planning and buying. But just to tell us a little bit about what, the role of purpose as far as your brand's concerned.
So I think it won't be a surprise to anybody that actually we are very much a purpose-led organisation, and really that's at the heart of our journalism. So for us, being able to produce very high quality journalism is really what drives everything and everybody every day at The Guardian. And so what I would say is that actually for us then, really what drives us in terms of Guardian advertising is to be able to facilitate that for another 200 years. As you may be aware, we've celebrated our 200th anniversary this year for Guardian UK. And so for Guardian advertising, from our point of view, it's really about being able to keep that going kind of in perpetuity, because that's the most important thing, to be able to provide really factual, high-quality journalism at the levels that we have done for decades, if not centuries.
Now, I was going to say, I know that there's certain brands, types of brand that you live your purpose to the extent that you've been public about the fact you won't take advertising from certain places and so on. Now, I want to move on to the point where we were saying, okay, so how might we be thinking differently, or should we be thinking about the power that advertisers have where they spend their money? So Claire wrote a piece which we ran in The Guardian this week, in campaign from The Guardian this week, talking about this issue. Where should you plan and buy your media? Because context matters. So I know you've done some research, and then we can get Stephen's afterwards. I'm going to hand back.
Thank you. So yes, absolutely. So the simple answer is yes, where matters, categorically. But we know that because we commissioned some global research, so some research that we executed across UK, US, and Australia. And we worked with Ipsos Mori to answer the question that we had sort of posited, which was, does it matter where, if you're a purposeful brand, does it matter where you advertise? And the research proved without a doubt, it was proven without a doubt, that it really does matter. And actually there was a significant amount of brand uplift. We tested 180 different combinations of purpose and non-purpose ads, advertisers and media agencies. And it was shown that the brand uplift that was delivered in terms of whether a brand was purposeful or not was 58% due to where it was placed. So due to the company that it kept. 28% was due to the brand, and the remaining percentage, which was 14%, was down to the creative. So what that tells you is that it matters where you put it, but I think what it also tells you, what we're sort of trying to say, is it tells the readers and the conscious consumer something about that advertiser itself in terms of who are they supporting, who are they seeking to support when they put their advertising in certain places. Because as I said, it's good company to keep. I would of course say that The Guardian is great company to keep, but there are other premium publishers which are great company to keep. You wouldn't expect, for example, to invest sort of time, energy and money on a kind of mental health campaign and then kind of, as I wrote about, propagate that in sort of social media feeds that might in of itself end up sort of adjacent to harmful content or misinformation. So, really the takeaway is categorically think about who you're supporting. Journalism matters. It matters probably now more than ever. And so from an advertising perspective, I think you need to be very considered about where you place your advertising.
This is a good time to bring in Marsha. So Marsha, I think even though quite a few people here know about the Conscious Advertising Network, could you give us the sort of 20-second pitch on it, what it is, and then to pick up on Claire's point about where you advertise and up to a point where you don't.
Thank you. So the CAD as an organisation, Conscious Advertising Network, it's purpose-led. It came about because there was a lack of purpose from the perspective of the founders with regards to ad tech. We talk about our manifestos centre around diversity, hate speech, children's well-being, misinformation, to name just 4 of those. But they are all about purpose, and that's the reason why we exist. So we also believe in bringing together key players. So the main work of the organisation is to bring our members, and those are agencies, those are advertisers, civil partners, and through conversations with the tech platforms, to make difference and make change. And the key differentiator for us as an organisation is that we facilitate those conversations. We talk to the civil society partners, organisations. We kind of really get to the heart of what the issues are from their own perspective, and we bring them to the table in a really open and collaborative stance, so that the conversation leads to change and affects change.
So, Marsha, when we were talking sort of ahead of time, there's this question which I'm going to ask you because it sort of touches on obviously what you've been talking about. Why does effective and knowledgeable use of advertising on existing tech platforms, how can that actually help marketers to be more careful about the messages their marketing pounds support? So I guess part of that question is, do advertisers and marketers know enough about where they're advertising? But
I would say from the experience of the Conscious Advertising Network, the answer is no. We need to be more investigative. We need to be asking more questions about the agencies we're potentially using for our advertising, and we need to be looking at, and from sort of housekeeping, I know that Stephen spoke about housekeeping. We need to look at internally the briefs and the RFQs that are raised, and kind of those documents that are put out to agencies. And subsequently, we need to be thinking about what the end result is in terms of your ad placement. So I think housekeeping is on 2 levels. It's about your briefs and your RFQs, but again, it's also about the people within your organisation and the setup of your organisations to ensure that your advertising and your purpose behind your advertising is coming from the right place.
Okay, so I'd like to explore. So I'd like to explore a bit later, sort of ad tech and the role of ad tech tools. Some good, maybe some bad. But Stephen, hopefully, again, Stephen, when we know advertising has a huge social impact, and I think if that is a way of me throwing the discussion which Claire and Marsha have raised, where do we advertise, and if the social impact, which can be really positive and can undermine trust if it's done wrong, and if this is a segue into your slides, take it.
I'll take it. I'll go use the mic up there. Thank you. I'll take the segue into the slides because I think it's important to focus on the public. We talk about a lot of this stuff is almost an internal discussion in the industry, and we at the AA with our members decided about 3 years ago now to actually talk to the public about these issues and look at really what were the drivers of public trust in advertising. And we've been very aware of a decline in trust in advertising over quite a long term. And what we wanted to do was really understand why that's the case, what those drivers are, and then what we can do about it. So I'm just going to give a very quick summary of that, because I think it puts purpose right in the context of a wider debate around trust. So the first slide up there. So advertising social contribution as a driver of public trust. Now, we didn't know how important social contribution was going to be, but what we did know was that, and this is favourability actually, this goes back to the mid-90s, but we've been tracking this back to the 60s in terms of favourability. We changed the sample, and so the curve is a bit disjunction before that, but you can see a long-term decline. And then actually in 2017-18, we started to see a turn in this. So it started to actually pick up. We weren't sure whether those are blips, but actually it's been a consistent uptick since then. And what we found is that favourability, we'd never tracked trust before, we just tracked favourability. We started tracking trust about 10 years ago. And this is actually a 3-year rolling average, because it's actually quite volatile around the trend. So we did a 3-year rolling average. And we actually saw the low point was 2015. And actually since then, on a 3-year rolling average, we're seeing a gradual improvement in trust. Going back to the levels, let's not get too excited, but going back to levels we were in 2010. So we'd reached a sort of low point in the middle of, around about 2015, and we're back on the way up gradually. But, and there's always a but in this, context is everything. So you look at that and you think, actually, well, we're doing a good job. Well, what is actually happening is that there's a rising tide of trust in business that's floating the advertising boat along with it. When you look at the gap, and this is, so we track a whole number of other industries as well, because it's important to see where we sit relatively. Around about 2010, we were in the bottom third of the pack. Now advertising is firmly at the bottom of the pack. And although we've got a rising trend, it's only in line with trust in all other industries. And so one of the interesting questions, which I don't actually know, we don't know the answer to, but is why is the public overall a bit more trusting of industry, businesses generally? We have lots of theories about why that would be the case. We think it's partly with a decline in political trust. There's almost they're displacing, when you look at the sort of ups and downs of our political leaders, a brand like BT actually looks like a model of stability and rectitude by comparison. So it could be that there's a displacement effect going on. We saw a big leap in trust in business around the Brexit vote. So political uncertainty, perhaps people trust, transfer some trust and goodwill. But advertising is still at the bottom of the pack. So we think, our job will be done when we're back in the middle of the pack. There's no reason why we should be at the bottom of the pack, because historically advertising wasn't. And the interesting thing is around the 2010s, banking was much lower rated on trust than advertising. Not surprisingly, after banks nearly destroyed the global economy, there was a big consumer backlash about that. And banks are now back in the middle of the pack. Because when you think about what banking has done, and I think this is the very instructive lesson for our industry, is they focused on their customers. They focused on doing the right thing by their customers. They cut the crap that had, in effect, almost destroyed their businesses and the wider economy. So there was a lot of humble pie, and they went back to basics of serving their customers well. So we want to have a focus in our industry, think about our end customer for our entire industry, whether you're a brand or a media owner or an agency, production company, whatever. Ultimately, marketing is all about better serving the public. You win by being better than your competition. So we're about better serving the public. And if we think about the advertising experience, if we can make a better advertising experience, the public will reward us with more business and more trust and more favourability. So rather like the banks focused on their customer service and their offer to their customers and doing the right thing by them, we've got to think about the same thing. So we've done a lot of work on what are the drivers of trust. And this is actually the summary chart that distills down a huge amount of research. So if you imagine, it's almost like a balance sheet. So the numbers, the percentages. So it's about 50-50, the negatives and the positives. So obviously negatives in the red on the left there. Bombardment is the number one negative. And then there are a couple of other things underneath that. I'm not going to go into great detail about the negatives, because I think today we're focused on more on the positives. The number one driver of trust and favourability is a whole bundle of things that all come under the umbrella of creativity and entertainment. People love good advertising. And it sounds like a blindingly obvious thing to say, but whenever you start the advertising process, start with trying to make something people are going to enjoy, that they're going to find useful, that's going to be welcomed in their lives, going back to that great David Ogilvy quote about remember we're a guest in people's living rooms. And I think that's, sometimes we forget that. There's a lot of advertising that isn't welcome in people's lives and isn't very entertaining or useful for people. So, it's already starting at a disadvantage commercially. So let's focus on making our advertising welcome in people's lives. Let's sort of focus on making it a positive, enjoyable experience for people. Because if we do those things, people will listen, pay more attention, and there's tons and tons of research that we all know that shows the correlation between high quality, engaging creativity that is useful and relevant to people and commercial success. They go hand in hand. And if you don't do those things, commercial success is much harder to achieve. But the thing that really surprised us, and the thing I wanted to draw out for today, is that second figure on the right in green is social purpose, the second most important driver of public trust in advertising. And that, we didn't know how big that was going to be as a factor. And this is not us overlaying factors. This is, in a sense, an aggregation of the key drivers and various statistical regression techniques to analyse this. So social purpose, a very important driver of public trust. In fact, we've repeated this data from we did it first in 2018, we've just run it again in 2021, and it's gone up, it's nudging up. And in fact, all of the positives are nudging up over that 3 years. And when you think about the pandemic and the sort of type of advertising that we've seen, it's probably no surprise there. So social purpose is a really important driver, the number 2 after creativity. So when you think about the things that you can do as an advertiser or an agency or anybody involved in the advertising ecosystem, don't bombard people. Be respectful in the media. Context is everything in this, but the whole media ecosystem needs to be planned and thoughtfully designed so that we maximise the experience and design great work that people are going to enjoy, and even better if it actually has, where it's relevant and appropriate for the brand or business, some sort of purpose behind it. Now, this was a big surprise to us, how important purpose was. So just before, and in fact it got overshadowed by the pandemic, we did a major piece of research which we launched at the beginning of 2020 about advertising social purpose. So we've got on the AA website, there's a whole set of research about this, because we didn't realise that this was the case. So we wanted to explore what that was. And in that research, we can see a whole load of factors that people think they want to see advertising about. And you can see them, I'm not going to read them all through here, but they're the big issues in society. And remember, this is pre-pandemic research, so I think it probably would have changed there. But mental health, environment, and in fact, domestic violence and abuse. I mean, some of the hate stuff that we saw earlier on that BT are talking about. I think these are things that are seen as where advertisers have got something relevant to say and brands have got something that's relevant to say. These are the things that people want them to talk about. But you see the whole panoply of big societal issues that the public are very comfortable, if it's done properly and done with authenticity and action, as SJ and Pete were saying earlier on, that it's relevant for brands to talk about. So there, a bit of context for the debate.
Thank you. And this brings me back to Claire, I think, because Claire, it's all very well thinking about, I know, trusted source of information. We talked about journalism. But actually, there's a paradox that some of this most trusted content people don't want to advertise next to. And we've heard about things like keyword blocking. And I'm sure Marsha's got a view on some of this. But tell us about, I think if there's the role of trust with journalism is so important, and advertising is important for helping to fund journalism. And again, we were talking with Marsha, do advertisers know where they are advertising or can't advertise because they're finding they're inadvertently blocked, which brings in the point about tools as well. So, down the line.
Thanks. No, absolutely. In terms of in terms of trust, Guardian and the Observer absolutely rank right up there in terms of PAMCO and many other stats in terms of who's the most trusted brand. So trust, Guardian, they are the two words that sit together. But the but is, as you say, take the brand safety technology that has absolutely been produced and developed and implemented to ensure that you don't get the repeats of the likes of sort of Nike and Amazon ending up in places that they really didn't want to end up in. And you say the answer is brand safety, but actually that same tool is actually preventing advertising ending up really in places where it really could resonate very strongly. And I have an example in terms of a case study that we did some months ago. We partnered with Havas and O2 because we were convinced that something was going a little awry in terms of brand safety. We knew that an article that we had done some time ago on the Women's World Cup that had used common football parlance, shoot, attack, that meant that content was restricted because keyword blocking, as you say. We also knew that actually in terms of being deemed risky content, a lot of our phenomenal content with regard to COVID-19 had been blocked. In fact, 96% had been blocked by virtue of it being deemed risky. Why was it risky? Well, because it used the language used the word drug or drugs prolifically. Of course it would. That's exactly the sort of article that we were writing about, but that was 96% of that COVID-19 content that was blocked. And so the case study, we took a chunk of inventory and we said actually a chunk of impressions and said actually that's deemed to be safe. and we took an equivalent amount of inventory that was deemed to be unsafe. Was there brand uplift in both cases? Yes, there absolutely was. How much was it in the safe inventory? Plus 4%, 4.1 to be precise. How much was it in the unsafe inventory? Nearly 36%. Nearly 36% uplift on inventory that otherwise would never have actually been advertised on. And you would say, well, why is that the case? Well, because of course it's the inventory that our readers want to see, the content that our readers want to see. It's smart, informative, it's the type of stuff that our readers are asking for. So actually we are limiting, to a greater or lesser degree, access for our readers as well as our advertisers in terms of getting their kind of brand message out. So the old adage of sort of a sledgehammer to crack a nut, I think, could easily be applied to brand safety tools. So I think one has to think very carefully as a kind of media player as to what tools you're using and how and where they're being used.
I'm going to shout this one. Okay, so you won't have been passive. So what happened when you go to the brand safety companies? Are they listening?
Unfortunately, I would say that throughout the whole sort of ad tech supply chain, particularly in the sort of programmatic supply chain, there are a number of players who are not particularly interested in solving this challenge. And so we need to find a way of solving the challenge in a collaborative way. So we can't do it in isolation. We spend an enormous amount of money, time, resource in terms of being able to ensure that we haven't got scam ads, that we haven't got ad fraud, but we can't do it all. And actually, as you'll be aware, readers tend to sort of see these things on our sites and think, oh my goodness, The Guardian, why have you not been able to deal with that? That's your problem. And actually, we cannot solve all those problems. As I say, we do a huge amount to solve them, but we need some partnership. I think regulation would be awfully helpful, but it's not the only answer. I think we need to, as I say, sort of be more collaborative in what we do. I think the consumer also, we love to call them the conscious consumer, and I think they really are very conscious of what's going on. And I think they have a number of sort of pressures that they can put onto publishers such as, not such as ourselves, but such as sort of the broader framework. So I think there's a lot to be done, and I think together we are better.
I wondered if I could add a point there. Thank you. We at CAN know that there are issues around purpose-led marketing, and so keyword blocking. In some instances, if you're more purposeful, you may well have a lack of reach and higher CPMs. And actually linking directly back to what you're saying, one of the things that we advise is that you need to try and look and clean up and audit your processes. And you do this with your agencies. You start that conversation. Again, it's interesting. We can't offer a solution, but what we do say, if you start the conversation, you're in the right place. To start the conversation, and then that leads on to collaboratively coming together. We've used that word quite a lot in this short space in this afternoon. It then leads to opening up the conversation where we can make things better.
Stephen, do you want to step in? Because you've got the power, you've got the UN blue helmets. You could bring everyone together.
Well, I think around all these issues, and just to echo what Marsha was saying about collaboration, I was at a session this morning that the ASA hosted at Westminster, and a lot of the discussion there was about digital platforms and the impending tsunami of digital regulation that's coming. And one of the things that has struck me, I've been doing this AA role for 5 years, and in fact, just after I'd started at the Ad Association, the Times ran a headline which changed our industry: "Brands Fund Terror." And it was a story about, I think it was terrorist content on YouTube that was being monetized. And that was, it was one of those things where you're in at the deep end. There's a full-blown industry crisis, advertising at the heart of one of the biggest sort of global scourges then in terms of terrorism, and it was ISIS and all the other stuff. And how do we resolve it? So clearly, since then, there has been a huge amount of progress. And if I look at, and it's one of those things that you tend to always focus on where the next challenge is and what the next problem is. But if I think about the progress that is being made, I would say we have made considerable progress. I don't think anybody would see that the job is done by any means. But the fact we have, and I would point to something like the Conscious Advertising Network and its manifestos and the engagement that you're getting there, the engagement we have with our work on trust, the engagement we see from all of our members, and we have everybody on our membership from publishers and broadcasters and tech platforms and advertisers and agencies, is a collective will to address these problems. And I know, Claire, you said that some places don't, but I don't think they're winning. I think the people who are winning are the people who are providing, and it comes back to ultimately, like any market, you succeed by serving your customers better. Those intermediaries which don't have those things uppermost in their raison d'etre as businesses, ultimately, money will drift away from them. Quality advertisers and agencies won't place their money through them because they'll find better alternatives. So competition and innovation that puts safety and quality and at the heart of it will win and is winning. So that's not me just being cup half full merchant and relentless optimist, although I am. I do think that is the case, and I think that progress over 5 years is remarkable.
Good, and I want to say also, journalism's done a good job, not perfect, in holding the advertising ecosystem to account a bit, including The Guardian. So, Claire, we come back to you to build on Stephen's idea of positivity. Have you got examples of where, if you like, purpose-led marketers are spending their money? I mean, I'm sure you'd like to The Guardian, but, got any tips? Again, people in the audience or who are watching online, they might go, okay, where should I be spending my money? Maybe some do's and don'ts about what, the planning and buying process should involve.
Yeah, so I think one word I like to use a lot is sort of authenticity. And I've heard it earlier, and I think it really rings true. So I think really understand sort of what you're trying to do and sort of hold yourself to account for sort of being authentic. So when you don't have to be perfectly purposeful. It's a journey, and actually none of us is perfect. Not one of us is perfect in anything that we do. So I think really just knowing what it is you want to try and achieve. And look, I would also say absolutely, let's not forget that there are other advertising objectives, and they shouldn't sort of be ignored for the purpose of purpose. First and foremost, delivering on those objectives is key. But I think I go back to the piece around the company that you keep. Make sure that your values in your brand sort of align with where you're putting your advertising. And that should start from the beginning of the conversation. And the beginning of the conversation in planning, whether it's sort of considering a sort of sustainability angle, whether it's considering a diversity angle, all of those things matter. And sort of does that feel authentic with the message that you're trying to convey? So I think that would be the heart of it for me. Try and just stick to that. Does this do what I really want it to do? The message that I want it to send? Because one thing I would say is that savvy consumer can see through a lot of the nonsense.
Just add one last thing. So we spoke about being half empty, half full. The fact that it's only at halfway means there is still stuff to do. So I would say that the Conscious Advertising Network, when initially formed, maybe only sort of 3 years ago, didn't really want to be around now. So they thought their job would be done. And the fact that we're still here and we're still looking to evolve the business, evolve the organisation to make continued and sustained change around purpose-led advertising, marketing, etc., means I think we all just need to be aware that it's something we need to keep still pushing for. That's what I would say.
No, I mean, I think the facts speak for themselves. Now, Marsha, I've asked you this before, but I still think it's relevant here because when Stephen talked about brands funding terror, and this was nearly 5 years ago now, we saw a lot of advertisers pause their spend. In fact, they didn't know where their ads were appearing. And we've seen a number of times advertisers pause their spend. What's your view on that? I know you're against boycotting, but it does seem to lead to some change when brands pause.
It does. But I think the main way in order to make a really impactful difference is to work with the tech platforms, and we don't boycott, but we do ask them to look at their own internal policies and their own internal documentation, so that when certain ads are featured on sort of certain pieces of content, they are not allowed to, basically. And that's not a boycott. That is actually working with the tech platforms to recognise where they are kind of supporting harmful content. And so that's what we believe in. It's looking at the content that's on your site. It's making sure that I think the way that can look at it is we don't want to fund bad, we want to fund good. It's as simple as that. And so we need to make sure that the ads that appear next to any content is good rather than bad.
Okay. We're going to... Gemma, you're right? Thank you. I know. The microphones, like everything else, slightly have a law of the law unto themselves. So, it's quite bright, the light. If anyone's got a question for any of these excellent speakers, they're welcome to stick their hand up. And we've got maybe 5 minutes to go, so just leave that. So I can see a question over there. So, do you want to holler, or you might be getting a microphone? We're just about to find out. And will you introduce yourself if you would like to?
Hello, I'm George Ames from Forster Communications. I just want to say, not very long ago I had 5 clients taking part in the Stop Hate for Profit boycott of advertising on Facebook. Half of them were doing that publicly, half of them not. To current day, only one of them is still going with that, Patagonia. Everyone else has quietly come back. Just a question, I suppose, reflection of, does that mean that brands need to be firmer with their purpose, or does it mean that actually it's impossible for the large platforms to ever change?
I think without regulation, as in governance for those platforms, I think sustained change is difficult. But on a more granular level, in order to make sure that those injustices don't occur, we need to keep the conversation going. So that's what CAN is about. It's about keeping that conversation going. So if within your organisation, if you find that brands are creeping back to a position that isn't great, what we would do as CAN in terms of helping you is keep those conversations going and keep those conversations going, and actually keep those conversations open. We do really work closely with civil society groups. So what we try and do is show brands the impact that that advertising on certain sites on certain content has at a societal level. And so I think it's about keeping the conversation open, but I do think it's difficult without governance from a higher level. I do, genuinely.
Just to add on that, I think when you look at the progress, so as an example, I think Facebook's a really interesting example of they are putting so much of their performance into the public domain. You know, they report quarterly on their performance against hate speech and so on, about how much they take down with machine learning, how what the prevalence is on the platform, and when you look at the progress over the years, they're making good progress. They would still say they're nowhere near good enough. I think it's now 2 or 3% is left before it's 97% it was taken down before it's ever. So there's they're making good progress, and I think when they first started doing it, it was maybe 70. So the machine learning is getting smarter and smarter. But of course, the scale of the platforms is so vast. The scale, that 2% may sound a small number, but when it's over many hundreds of millions of posts, it's still potentially a large number. But they do put it in the public domain, and as do Google. There's a huge amount there now that is put in the public domain. When you click on ads, you can see why you've been targeted. You can turn off the targeting. You can turn off the algorithm if you want to. All of these controls are there. I think one of the interesting things that I think has been a reaction since that sort of, it was a brilliant piece of investigative journalism that caused this seismic shift in the industry, is the amount that the way that the platforms have put in the public domain a lot of their work in this. So a very good example would be Facebook and election advertising. Now, every single ad that's posted by a political party in an election, every variant that's posted against different subgroups, is all put in the public domain. So that wasn't the case. So in a way, these things are all about the progress that they're making, partly by pressure from regulators, pressure from civil society, pressure from advertisers. They are responding. And I think when you talk to all of the platforms, they say they don't, obviously they want to be part of an environment where free speech is encouraged, and they don't want to be the arbiters of what should and shouldn't be allowed in a free society. They actually will welcome, if you like, a government somebody defining that's hate speech, that isn't hate speech, because ultimately, it's left to, if you like, American tech companies to define what is free speech in our country and what's free speech in other countries where they have very different attitudes. Now, I think leaving it all to governments around the world may not be a good thing, because a lot of governments don't take the attitude. Very few have as liberal a view as the UK and US. If you leave it all to government, like in places like Hungary and Poland and other places where governments are taking a view on free speech that would be seen as utterly draconian here. So all of these things are incredibly nuanced, and I think where I think in effect the healthy tension in our society and economy and political landscape is it's a sort of, almost like a tug of war between these things to find a consensus, to find a place where society is happy. And of course, it's a continually evolving thing.
I think just in terms of what I would actually want to see, though, is sort of slightly more proactivity. You are right. They respond to regulation. They respond to things. I think, some of the positions that some premium publishers such as ourselves have done, you look at sort of personal data and the fact that, we unbundle the permissions and we give much more choice and transparency. I'd love to see a bit more of that. And so I think just in terms of, how people behave, reacting all the time is probably not the kind of nirvana that we're after.
It looks like there's one more question. Will you make it fairly brief, because we're nearly out of time?
Absolutely. Just a quick one, really, to say one of the dilemmas I actually have is that I tell my clients that absolutely we need to put the pounds in, into the media that are doing good, like The Guardian, for example. However, I have this particular dilemma, and that is when I look at the audience insights and who I'm trying to reach with some of the social issues that I work on, I actually find that the audience are consumers of other types of media, and they're the ones we need to reach. And so I sometimes find it's a bit of a dilemma, because I want the pounds and the money to go to the good media, but I'm also trying to reach the audience who are consumers of other media, and I'm just terrified as well that we may drive that underground by doing so. So I just wondered what your thoughts are on that.
Okay, that's very interesting. So I'm going to go down the line again, if that's okay, Marsha. Do you want to go first?
Probably not. Yeah, I think it is. And as we said, that there are definitely issues. I don't know. There are definitely issues between purpose-led marketing, making sure your clients are reaching the audience that they want to reach. And again, we can potentially only do that via pushing the boundaries at all points and opening up the conversation. Now, I know that doesn't help, because at the moment
You've got good enough.
I know that doesn't help because you want to answer that question now, but it's really, I think it's a difficult one, definitely. I think you just need to keep pushing the boundaries and keep opening the conversation, looking at other avenues that aren't traditional, maybe for your client, etc. Looking at more local marketing or local avenues, that may not help, but unless we have the conversation, we can't actually affect any change. That probably was the most useless answer I could give you.
I thought it was a good answer. Good answer. Here you go.
I'm going to ask where you work, just to get a sense of.
I work at Social Change UK.
Right.
It's just that Guardian readers aren't anti-refugee, for example. Yet, if you want to try and get messages out, you need to go to the, try to get people who consume other media to try and get some of those messages out. Because otherwise, we're talking to a mirror if we advertise with the Guardian. And that I'm massively advocates for, but that's the dilemma, really.
But my observation would be, it takes all sorts. We are very diverse and mixed media economy that reflects the sort of diverse interests and the different sort of tribes in the UK. So, actually, where you're taking your go where the message is going to be most effective is the first and foremost, and then within that context, make sure that the way you position the communications or the ads or whatever you're giving to those media is as authentic and reflective of your purpose as a business, actually. And I think actually picks up on what Claire was saying about putting advertising in what might be seen as more challenging environments actually is disproportionately effective because you get the attention. So I always think run to the sound, run to where you hear the fire coming from. And challenge it in the place where perhaps it's most challenging.
Yeah, I think I would only just sort of say in terms of course I understand your point about sort of being a mirror with the Guardian, you perhaps you know what you get. Two things I would say. One is that I'm not sure always that you really know in terms of the audiences that you are going to get on certain places, but actually there are plenty of premium publishers. We aren't the only one, and I think supporting great journalism in a number of areas and that sort of plurality of voice is important. And so I think both of those things should be considered. But of course, always happy to talk to you.
We're out of time. I'd love to give my answer, but I'm just going to say yes. I believe in the plurality of media, and I think there's lots of big audiences out there and niche audiences, and my main plea is support trusted content, whatever it is. Now, I'm going to say Marsha, Stephen, Claire, thank you so much, and Gemma.